We shall go on to our next speaker, Dr. Reema Bansal. Are you connected, Dr. Reema?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah. Dr. Reema Bansal is the additional Professor Uvea and Vitreoretinal Services from Advanced Eye Center, PGI, and is an elected member of International Uveitis Study Group and National Academy of Medical Sciences. And she's a very eminent speaker on many podiums. And look, nice to meet you again within the interval of a week, I think, or maybe more. So she's going to be talking on ocular manifestations of Takayasu arteritis. On to you.
So good evening, and thank you, Chitra ma'am and Dr. Srinivas, and thank you, AIOS, for this opportunity. I shall be talking on ocular manifestations in Takayasu arteritis. So we know that Takayasu arteritis is an autoimmune granulomatous inflammation of the aorta and its branch, arch of aorta and its branches, resulting in their attenuation and obliteration. First, the earliest description was given of this disease as a pulseless disease in 1761 by Morgagni. It is known as pulseless disease simply because there is difficulty in detecting the peripheral pulses because of vascular narrowing. And subsequently in 1908, it was named this disease as Takayasu arteritis by Takayasu, who was the Japanese ophthalmologist. This disease mainly often affects young Asian women below 30 years of age. So depending upon the involvement of the aorta and its branches, the disease is classified into type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'll not go into the details. So basically it is the arch of aorta or ascending aorta, descending, thoracic, abdominal and suprarenal branches. So when we have the involvement of the we have involvement of the aortic arch and its branches, it causes ischemic ocular manifestations. And when there is involvement of the abdominal or the suprarenal aorta, there are manifestations in the eye because of severe hypertension. Now, why the eye gets involved in Takayasu arteritis? Simply, we just have to know the basic anatomy of the arch of aorta when we have the brachiocephalic trunk, the subclavian artery, and the common carotid artery. And then we have the internal and the external carotid arteries. Then you have the ophthalmic artery and then the retinal arteries. So when we come to the ocular manifestations in Takayasu arteritis, they were described by Oyama and Asayama into 3 types. Type 1 is Takayasu retinopathy. Type 2 is mixed of 1 and 3 is, as I said earlier, retinopathy because of severe hypertension. Type 1, which is Takayasu retinopathy, is further classified into 4 stages. Stage 1 is when you have distension of veins. Stage 2 is when you have formation of microaneurysms. Stage 3 is arteriovenous anastomosis, and stage 4 of basically complications like rubiosis, retinal neovascularization, and cataract, vitreous hemorrhage, etc. A modified classification of retinal findings is also given as when you have no retinal findings, it is known as stage A. When you have some kind of retinal abnormality, it is B. And then B1, when you have only venous dilatation. B2, when you have microaneurysms, soft exudates, and retinal hemorrhages. And B3, when you have arteriovenous shunts and retinal neovascularization. The Takayasu retinopathy manifests either as hypoperfusive retinopathy or hypertensive retinopathy. Many times these patients present with a low intraocular pressure because of chronic retinal hypoxia. The reported prevalence of eye manifestations in Takayasu arteritis is about 30%, but the range is wide, 8.1 to 68%. Sometimes the changes in the retina may be very subtle and they are just located in the peripheral retina. Hence, fluorescein angiography is important to clearly reveal these subtle changes. This is an example of a 38-year-old woman we just saw maybe last week, who was a known case of Takayasu arteritis, and she had massive occlusion as revealed on the CT angio. Bilateral subclavian occlusion 90%, left common carotid 50%, and the right common carotid artery was completely occluded. Ocular manifestations, she did not present with much ocular symptoms, but systemically she had headache and syncopal attacks. Anterior segment was normal, and when we dilated her fundus, you don't see very gross abnormalities, but if you look into the periphery, you can see microaneurysms and retinal hemorrhages, more prominent in the right eye. So the left eye also had subtle hemorrhages in the infratemporal extreme periphery. Now we got the fluorescein angiography of this patient done, and what we saw, these changes were much more prominent on the fluorescein in the form of some kind of vascular leakage and microaneurysms in the periphery, which were much more seen on the fluorescein. Similarly, in the left eye also. These patients have a delayed arm to retina circulation time, and I'll be sharing a case seen by my colleague in PGI, Dr. Mohit. This patient was seen about maybe 3 years ago. You can see there is, even at 38 seconds, the arterial filling has just started. So there is a very significant delayed arm to retina circulation time. And at 56 seconds, you are still not having any venous filling. And you see the macular ischemia and peripheral large areas of capillary non-perfusion. You have microaneurysms all over, arteriovenous shunts all over, and neovascularization of the disc also. So you have, even at 1 minute, the venous filling has just started. And you can see the periphery, which is completely knocked out in this eye. The late phase shows disc, the leakage from the neovascularization on the disc. And what is very classic is you can see the segmented blood column in the arteries here. So this is very classical of, it's just suggestive of a very sluggish circulation in the arteries. So we have our own experience from the PGI team of how these manifestations can be reversed. And these patients, when they undergo endovascular procedures like stenting or bypass and all that, so many of these patients have demonstrated reversal of findings. For example, now this is one patient shared from this series of 5 patients that we reported. So you can see disc leakage, you can see the arteriovenous shunting, which is seen all over, and venous dilatation. Another patient where you have subtle hemorrhages in the right eye, very subtle cotton wool spots in the right eye, and you have neovascularization of the disc in the left eye, massive, extensive cotton wool spots in the left eye, and very tiny hemorrhages here and there in the left eye. This is another patient where you can demonstrate most of the findings of Takayasu retinopathy in the form of neovascularization of the disc, venous dilatation and bleeding, narrowing of the retinal arteries with inflow ischemia, microaneurysms, arteriovenous anastomosis, and again box scarring, the sluggish circulation of the blood. Now this patient underwent stenting, and this you can see that all these findings have resolved after the stenting. So all these findings have become are reversible. This was reported by our colleague, Dr. Ramandeep Singh in New England Journal, where they have actually demonstrated the video of the sluggish circulation in the retinal arteries. And you can see this one of the patient, you can see there is segmentation of the blood columns, which suggests a sluggish flow, also known as box scarring.
And you have 1 minute remaining.
Yeah, once the patient undergoes stenting, there is normalization of the retinal vessels caliber. Both the veins become less dilated and the arteries which were narrow have increased luminal diameter. So the late complications of IE in Takayasu arthritis are ischemic complications like hemorrhage, NVD, NVE, rubiosis iridis, neovascular glaucoma, optic atrophy, and reports of anterior ischemic optic neuropathy, central retinal artery occlusion, and branch retinal artery occlusion have also been reported in Takayasu arthritis. So just a word on pathogenesis. It is the carotid artery obliteration which leads to hyperperfusion of all the eye structures. Initially, there are disorders in the circulation of the central retinal artery, which causes venous stasis in the retina. And this venous stasis retinopathy causes chronic retinal hypoxia. And this venous dilatation is accompanied by venous wall relaxation. The chronic hypoxia of the retinal tissue is caused by insufficient retinal arterial circulation. This could cause secretion of the vasodilation factors. And adenosine has also been implicated in dilating the focal vessels, especially the capillaries, with modulation controlled by the autocrine system and the adenosine receptor system. OCTA has shown a role of detecting macular ischemia as an adjunct to fluorescein angiography. So to summarize, this is to strongly emphasize the routine and regular ophthalmic screening in patients with Takayasu arthritis at the time of diagnosis. We've demonstrated the role of fluorescein angiography in demonstrating the changes which may be subtle on clinical examination. And also these patients need examination at adequate intervals to diagnose significant treatment-related complications like steroid-induced cataract at a very early stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rima. That was a wonderful presentation. Is there some way, like some kind of a PET scan, wherein you could identify the vascular abnormality before the structural changes come because the impact is so severe? It doesn't happen, no? You do not, you identify it only after you see the retinal findings, or are you able to identify it even before that?
No, many of these patients come with the diagnosis of Takayasu, but if we see these kind of subtle changes and clues like the patient has syncopal attacks, blood pressure is low, the IOP is low, and you have findings, like ocular ischemic syndrome. So we do get these patients investigated on these lines.
So on to the expert panel discussions.
I have a question, Rima. Fantastic talk. Can you give us some suggestions in terms if ophthalmologist has to examine a patient with Takayasu? So what would be their recommendation to the systemic colleagues for retinal evaluation? So what is that you would like to suggest? Because you work in PGI, is there anything which you would like to suggest for the rest of the team members?
Once anybody has a patient of Takayasu arthritis, it's mandatory to send that patient for an ocular examination, irrespective of whether the patient is symptomatic or not. And ocular examination means right from the anterior segment, your visual acuity, IOP, and dilated fundus examination, which is a must. I'll just share you an experience with this lady, which I showed you. She was so bad systemically, she could not even sit on the slit lamp. She had severe syncopal attacks. The moment she would keep her chin on the slit lamp, she would just collapse. So what we did initially was we just examined her. She allowed dilated fundus examination. That was fine. We sent her back. She was admitted in the ward. And then finally, when she got stable, we talked with her colleagues. And when she got stable, then we called her for an fluorescein angiography. So it is a must, but considering the fact that the patient is stable, the patient is able to undergo. Because when we saw these hemorrhages, we were not sure whether we are missing out any capillary non-perfusion areas in the periphery, and that is what scares you. You can't let it go. So maybe I think we called her after 4 or 5 days when she was stable, accompanied by the physician, the resident, and then she was comfortably able to undergo. So fluorescein angiography is important. And the moment you see these ischemic complications, they should be taken up for laser photocoagulation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dr. Biswas, Dr. Ratnam, we have not heard from you for a while. So no discussion on this. Dr.
I'm sorry, it is in mute.
Yeah.
It's a very good talk. All my questions she asked, she answered in her discussion.
Yeah.
It is one fantastic talk, Rima.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
So then we shall,
I can
yes?
can I just add one small point?
Yeah.
Again, very nice talk, Dr. Rima.
Thank
And
you.
like you mentioned, most of the ocular complications that we see are because of the ischemia, and we have to manage them accordingly. But I think one point again which needs to highlight it is that the systemic immunosuppression is also important to continue, so
They
that
are
the
all,
further.
that's right. These patients are on aggressive corticosteroids, on systemic immunosuppression, many of them on 2 immunosuppressive
yeah.
agents. And then it is up to the physician to take up the patient for whatever endovascular interventions.
Yeah, sometimes rarely when we see the patient for the first time, then we also should start this immunosuppressive therapy, get it started along with the stenting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.